Good evening. Let me call to order the Monday, August 5th, 2019 Planning Commission meeting. Can we get a roll call attendance, please?
Ms. Weiss.
Here.
Mr. Krasner, not here. Mr. Puentes. Here. Mr. Rankin, not here. Mr. Stevens.
Here.
Ms. Teets, not here. Mr. Wadiska.
Here. All four of us. So we have a quorum here. And can I get a motion to adopt this evening's agenda?
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt the agenda.
Second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Seeing it's unanimous. We are going to move on to item 4, the speaker series. We have none. You had said that maybe there was someone to talk. No. Okay. And do we have any receipt of petitions for items not on the agenda?
No, we do not.
Okay. And I'm looking at you. Should I be swiveling this way when I ask that question? This is a new sort of setup here.
It's a new setup that's a return to the old.
Yeah, that is true.
With a clerking table and a
Yeah.
staff table and separate podiums for staff and members of the public. It is an exciting time to move back into the new city hall. I also want to take the opportunity to introduce our new team member, Emily Bazemore. Is going to be, she's a new planner on the team, and she's also going to be serving as the Planning Commission clerk going forward.
Welcome aboard. This is a great group. It's going to be the highlight of your day.
To your question about organizing the meeting, yes, generally the clerks will know more than me.
Yeah, of course. On everything. Okay, well, welcome aboard. So let's get it right into it. We have 6 action items today. The first one is the comprehensive plan update on the demographics chapter.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioners. Before you tonight it's for public hearing and final action recommendation from the Planning Commission. This is on an update to the demographics chapter of the comprehensive plan. In your packet is a number of materials, including the staff report. I want to highlight a couple items in the staff report and then open it up for the public hearing and discussion. As I mentioned, the request before you described in lines 5 through 7 of the staff report, public hearing and final recommendation to the City Council. Beginning on line 9, the recommendation staff does recommend that a positive recommendation be made on the draft chapter. The Planning Commission last saw this material in a joint work session with Council on July 15th, 2019. There are no substantive changes since that time as outlined on lines 19 and 20. There were minor formatting changes following the work session. Just a brief introduction to motivate the change and describe briefly what's in the chapter. Demographics, starting on line 22, of course, an important piece of information for city planning. The demographics chapter of the city's comprehensive plan was last updated 13 years ago, but of course the information is central to so many different aspects of planning, whether it's for public facilities or schools or operating expenses, services, parks, environmental planning, infrastructure, as the city's recently seen with some of the heavy rains that have been falling. To get a better understanding of where the city's going and what it might need in the future, the demographics work was broken out into 3 sections as described briefly beginning at line 54. First aspect of that was trends. What's happened over the last several years in the city and how does that relate to what's going on in the region and the nation? Part 2 was projections, getting a sense of where will the city go next? What's the demand for folks who want to live in the city or for folks who want to work in the city? And how are household formations changing? And then lastly, connections. How does it relate to day-to-day operations of the city? The public engagement followed the usual course for comprehensive plan chapters, meeting with boards and commissions, presenting information, holding community meetings, running a public survey. In general, there were some themes of feedback, and those are summarized on lines 104 through 110. And the general feedback was questions from the community about, as the city continues to change, how would it maintain and perhaps highlight its history? what would be the impacts of population growth on the city's infrastructure and city services, and how could the city continue to support aging in place for existing residents. The rest of the report describes the timing for this effort, which began in November of 2018, made its way through, of course, research and public engagement, and now here we are on August 5th with a recommended action from the Planning Commission.
Okay, great. So, do we have any discussion we'd like to do on this before I open it up to the public? Yeah.
A couple of
Go ahead.
minor items. Well, one's minor, anyway. Typo on page 12 of the actual chapter, draft chapter. The very last sentence talks about the balance between residents and jobs presents the city will opportunities. I think you mean with opportunities. And the second, somewhat more substantive, it's on page 15, where it discusses the strategy of encouraging development of Class A office space, which, of course, is very desirable. You might want to put in a couple of words that just connect the dots as to the value of that in the context of this chapter, which is to provide the opportunity for more higher wage jobs here so that people don't have to travel, farther distances. So I like the strategy, just it needs a little connection of the dots perhaps.
Sure, that could
That's all I
certainly
have.
be added as another sentence or even another clause to the strategy in italics there.
And that's all I have.
Okay, great. Anything else on this chapter?
I had a question. I had a question about inclusion of the racial composition data from the demographic trends report.
We reached out to the consultant team who's been helping us throughout this entire effort. With the leave schedules, we weren't able to make contact with them in time for the package distribution tonight. We have been talking at the staff level, and we think it's important to include that information. And our recommendation as staff would be for the Planning Commission to, as part of the motion, provide direction to staff to incorporate summary demographic information into an appendix.
Okay. Did you get the answer you're looking for?
I think I need to make a recommendation.
Well, I was
How
just
do we
gonna-
do that procedurally?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I'm going to open it to the public first, but this one is not overly controversial, this comprehensive chapter on demographics. I think that ultimately, like all of these comprehensive plans or these chapters, it's a really important role that the Planning Commission has here to update it and to guide the community and to help the community understand through that with their input, understand where we want to head and what challenges we face. Certainly the demographics, I believe this chapter was done with a lot of analytical rigor. There was multiple methodologies used, and will give us a really good sense of what looks like to be tremendous growth, both primarily in population and some diversity as well over the next, or the long range. I forget, this goes out all the way to 2040, right?
2045.
2045. Yeah, so a lot of growth and a lot of challenges we're going to have to face to meet this kind of growth. It's hard to imagine that we would be so much larger than we already are. It's already fairly dense here, but that I also think comes with a lot of wonderful opportunities with that kind of density and that kind of population mix. So before we take any action on this, I would like to open it up to the public. Is there anybody here who would like to speak on the demographics chapter? Okay, well then let me close it to the public. I think we are ready then for a motion. Procedurally, the staff has provided one for us. If you go to the staff report, or anybody goes to the staff report. Right, and at the very top, Mrs. Weiss, I assume you want to make this motion? Okay, yeah, so at the very top, there's a lot of whereases. but if you read this, and you can suggest any amendments you'd like to make, typically on something like this, we don't, but you are more than welcome to. And then we would go from there. Get a second and vote.
Given the corrections noted from Commissioner Stevens as well as the request from Commissioner Weiss, I think the way to do it would be to add perhaps a couple sentences at the end of the resolution itself to provide direction to staff to clarify the typos as discussed, as well as to add the appendix as discussed.
Is that a whereas, or is that an additional paragraph?
I think at the very, I mean,
Be it resolved.
yeah, at the
Resolved.
very end, I think you just say, and include the additions noted at the meeting. That sort of thing. I don't think you have to write a whole new sentence.
Okay.
I mean, you're only, let's be clear here, though, you're only on draft 11, compared to like 31 on the housing chapter. You need another couple of drafts
We
here.
do normally rack
11?
up more versions.
That's a low number for you guys, usually in the 40s. So we're doing our part to try to extend the process.
To your question, yes, any changes go in the therefore be it resolved section.
Okay. So I'm going to just suggest a recommendation. I don't know the procedures here. So I would recommend that or do I need to make a motion with a recommendation?
Yeah, so
Okay.
do you have the, oh, it's up on this big screen. So I would just read it, say I'd like to make well, this is a resolution. Usually we're making motions here as opposed to resolutions.
Because of the mechanics, I believe, of the charter, the language that's used is resolution versus motion.
Okay, so just say I'd like to make a proposed resolution and then just read. That's
Read the whole thing and then
know.
add my addition to it.
the one phrase.
Need the
yeah.
whereases, or can we just go straight to the now therefore? Be it resolved.
We often read them out, although I've questioned whether we can just accept the resolution as presented in the staff report.
Start a new,
I'll take your guide. I mean, we typically do read them out. This one's quite long. I'm happy to do it either way.
Yeah, let's,
You know what, I think because it's being recorded, video recording, more than people are reading it, I think it's probably a good idea to go through the extra 60 seconds to read it. So.
I'll do that. I should have told my kids to log in to Falls Church
Hey,
TV
it's on,
tonight.
you can call it up. You can see it tomorrow or the next day.
Okay.
Thrill
so-
never ends.
So I make a motion to approve the proposed resolution. Resolution recommending approval of an amendment to the 2005 Comprehensive Plan to update and replace Chapter 2, Demographics, with People, Housing, and Jobs, Demographics chapter of the city's comprehensive plan. Whereas the Virginia Code, Section 15.2-2223, requires that the city have a comprehensive plan for the city that considers, among other things, the needs of the residents of the city, and consideration of those needs requires an understanding of the number of residents and their attributes. And whereas Section 17.04 of the city charter makes the Planning Commission responsible for preparation of the city's comprehensive plan, and whereas Section 17.06 of the city charter enables the Planning Commission to prepare and adopt individual components of the comprehensive plan, and whereas Section 15.2-2228 of the state code also gives the city council the authority to grant final approval to comprehensive plan changes previously approved by the Planning Commission, and whereas Chapter 2 of the city's comprehensive plan, People, Housing, Jobs, will replace the existing chapter Demographics and will provide the city council and city staff with updated, valuable information regarding the residents of the city on which to base planning decisions. And whereas People, Housing, and Jobs was developed with substantial public engagement that included community meetings, a survey, and review by the city's advisory boards and commissions. And whereas People, Housing, and Jobs identifies connections to place the demographic trends and projections in perspective of city functions. And whereas People, Housing, and Jobs discusses general housing, transportation, and public facilities and services planning strategies for projected future needs of the city. Now therefore be it resolved by the Planning Commission of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, that Chapter 2, People, Housing, and Jobs, Demographics chapter of the City Comprehensive Plan, which is attached hereto, is hereby adopted by the Planning Commission as an updated and revised demographics chapter of the city's comprehensive plan with, do I need to add our additions at the end of this paragraph or here? Updated with edits as proposed by Mr. Stevens this evening, and with an appendix that includes additional data, including racial composition data from the Demographics Trends Report. Replacing the version of Chapter 2 that was adopted on October 24th, 2005 as part of the 2005 Comprehensive Plan, and that the Planning Commission recommends that City Council grant final approval of the amendment to the Comprehensive Plan to replace the existing Chapter 2 of the Comprehensive Plan with People, Housing, and Jobs Demographics Chapter of the city's Comprehensive Plan.
A second?
Well done. You're now a seasoned veteran at this. You got trial by fire right there. Do we have, you got a second, do we have any other comments before we take a vote on this?
This is very well done.
All right. That's to Mrs. Weiss and the staff, I assume. Okay. Can we take a roll call vote on this, please?
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Mr. Wadiska.
Yes. All right, great. All right, moving on to item 6B, comprehensive plan update on the housing chapter.
Before we move on, I just want to celebrate the success of the previous action, that this was an effort that was done in a rather efficient fashion with a small amount of consultant resources. Lisa Sturdivant and Ryan Price are, of course, experts in the field of demographics, and they're known both locally, regionally, and nationally. We often had to schedule meetings with them while they were coming back from South Carolina, Delaware, other places in Virginia. And of course, their knowledge was tremendously helpful to the city, bringing in expertise as well as external knowledge. And of course, at the staff level, moving these things along. Jeff Hollern, working with Shana Schaefer and others to move this along, and Shelley Maestrin, another consulting member on the planning staff, to move this along very quickly. Thank you for that digression.
Yeah.
Let's see. Next item up, is the housing chapter. This is similar in feel to the previous item, but this is also a comprehensive plan update. The request that's before the Planning Commission, again, is to hold a public hearing and make a recommendation to council by resolution. The recommendation from staff is to make a positive recommendation to the City Council. Updates since this draft chapter was last seen by the Planning Commission. This was last seen at a joint work session with the Council on July 15th. And a summary of changes is described in the staff report beginning on line 15. Those changes, in short, first a glossary. There was a revised definition of AMI, area median income, provided to make that more clear. Description of affordable housing, there was additional language added to explain that commitment to affordable housing is a value that's held at a community-wide level. And to describe the community-wide benefits that come from providing housing at a range of prices. The evaluation of housing needs was updated to further emphasize that accessory dwellings is one possible tool for meeting a portion of those needs. And then implementation was amended as well to specifically identify faith groups as a potential partner organization in providing affordable housing. That last item, of course, borrows best practices from other communities where often houses of worship have seen part of their charge as expanding housing options. It can also, of course, provide fiscal relief for those groups. All changes since that joint work session are highlighted with red text, and those changes are included in Attachment 1, which is the draft chapter. I do want to take a moment to call out for to identify the importance of planning for housing in a community. That I think a lot of people say, housing is just something that gets provided by the market. But I think a lot of people know that housing doesn't operate in a free market. It is heavily constrained by local regulations, as well as financing that is available, as well as what people are willing to build and perhaps what people are used to. And sometimes even state departments of transportation constrain what kind of housing can be built and bought. A lot of it is wrapped up in the regulations of city planning and regional planning. But housing is critical to a well-functioning, health-safe community, that it has so much to do with, one, providing for efficient transportation systems, getting housing in the right place to begin with, supporting economic development, that people want to be able to live in proximity to their jobs. They don't want to have to travel. Some people do, but not everybody wants to travel 30, 40, 50, 60 miles in order to get to work every day, or even to get to day-to-day needs. Education, healthcare, and the environment. Of course, the further apart things are, or the more difficult they are to access, the less you have available to spend on those other things. The scope of work for this chapter includes both a vision for housing in the city, and that vision specifically for housing builds on the city's 2017 vision statement of an inclusive community, and I'll read out that draft vision statement in a moment. And also strategies, that all of the topical chapters, the functional chapters in the City Comprehensive Plan include a rough implementation plan. It's not fixed, it's open to change, but it does suggest a course of action to follow upon adoption of the new chapter. The draft vision statement included in the chapter reads as follows. This is written out beginning on line 79 of the staff report. Create and maintain a diverse supply of housing that supports an inclusive and welcoming community. As the region continues to grow, work proactively to ensure affordable housing keeps pace with population increases and is available for a range of incomes, household sizes, generations, and needs. The chapter then goes on to describe a variety of strategies that can be carried out in support of that vision. They're summarized on lines 86 through 96. They talk about the strategies speak to housing that's available at a range of incomes, workforce housing, moderate housing, low-income housing. All those terms are defined in the draft chapter, and they relate to percentages of the area median income. Entry-level home ownership, that it's been seen in the city that it's harder and harder to get into the for-purchase housing market in the city, so making that a strategy. Aging in place. It's no surprise that people in the country and in the city are getting older. The baby boomer generation is hitting retirement, and folks who are transitioning to fixed incomes often need help to be able to support staying in the community they've lived for so long. Development regulations to allow a wider variety of housing types. As I mentioned, housing is not a free market. It's constrained by local regulations. And so revisiting the city's zoning ordinance is an appropriate thing to do to make sure that the zoning ordinance, the rules of the game, are set up to achieve the goals the city is trying to work toward. Preservation of existing housing stock and tree canopy is related to that. Does the zoning ordinance support the idea of modest additions or perhaps accessory dwelling units to access more value in the property while also maintaining tree canopy instead of clear cutting, as often happens with the tear down? Providing for people with disabilities. Of course, the Miller House is a tremendous addition to the city's housing stock. Does the city have more needs for that kind of housing? Fair access to housing. Of course, complying with federal regulations regarding fair housing is always important. Monitoring regional and local housing markets, so knowing what's going on. The rise in the city's housing prices and the change in the city's housing stock and home ownership trends, those same changes were seen in Arlington a few years ago, and now they're making their way westward. So by staying aware of what's going on in the region, the city can get a better sense of what's coming into its own jurisdiction. And then continuing to partner with neighboring jurisdictions, nonprofits, faith groups, finding ways to provide more affordable housing, whether it can be done specifically in the city's boundaries or immediately adjacent to the city. By partnering, there may be an opportunity to get more benefit than could otherwise be done going it alone. Summary of the public engagement process. As usual, city staff reached out to the city's boards and commissions. 2 different surveys were held. Community meetings were held. And the public engagement ran from April of 2018. And of course, it's continuing tonight with the public hearing. With that, I will close the staff report and turn it over to the commission for questions.
Thank you very much. Do we, as a commission, have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. More of a comment. I do think a lot of this is very good. I think the vision statement is a step in the right direction. Those strategies you listed are great. But I think there's something big missing here, especially given, Mr. Stoddard, your comments about the market and the development strategies that constrain the market. There was tons of stuff in here about, in the comments from the boards and commissions about revising the development strategies. You mentioned it yourself, and zoning changes and ordinances, but I didn't see that really anywhere in the chapter. There's a small reference to accessory dwelling units, and there's a section in the ESC comments where they ask for some more zoning changes, and the staff comments say that the actions support amending the zoning ordinance to allow for more forms of housing, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't really come, there isn't that direction in the chapter. And given the comments, I wonder, is this something that then appears, does it manifest itself in the land use chapter when that gets revised? Or is there something missing in here that needs to then correspond to that chapter when it's revised? You see where I'm going?
I do. I think I understand, if I could just paraphrase it back just to make sure I understand, that what you're looking for is more language or more direct language related to the kinds of zoning changes that would be brought forward to open up regulations. So,
In fact, I think the only reference to any kind of regulatory change is around the ADUs or the
That's on
the
page
accessory dwelling
19.
units.
Page 19, underway. It says amend the zoning ordinance to allow for more forms of housing, such as granny flats, accessory dwelling units, duplexes, and quadplexes. But it's just very,
Yeah.
very loose.
Especially given the comment, given, I think, how important that is, and given the comments that are in here, it felt like it should be stronger somewhere, more directional. But it's more of a question, too. Does that, so the land use chapter will be revised as well? And that's where a lot of those specifics, I guess, would
yeah, it
manifest
could
themselves
be
or
that often, as you're referencing, there are other chapters in the comprehensive plan. They often overlap. So oftentimes, the conversation in one chapter will open up, and then perhaps a subsequent chapter would put make more explicit the directions. The intent, as was referenced on page 19, is to lay out the strategies coming immediately out of the chapter. I was going to report this during the director's report, but I'll use it now. That is that there is already positive progress on amending some of the development regulations in the city. Let's see, where do I have them? There was the city applied for and received a Transportation and Land Use Connections grant from the Council of Governments to review and amend the multifamily parking regulations. Of course, anything that can be done to reduce parking regulations also goes along with reducing the cost of housing. For point of reference, an underground parking space, which is what often folks are building in these buildings, costs somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 per space. So reducing the parking regulations in this, if it can be shown through proper survey and study that those parking regulations are beyond what's needed, that can dramatically reduce the cost of housing. Also underway in the Planning Commission's annual work program is to pick up some work that was previously started in Overlay District for Greenway Downs. Currently, the zoning regulations make most of the housing in Greenway Downs non-conforming, which makes it difficult to expand without variance. Also, there was the city staff applied for a grant to the Virginia Housing Development Authority, VHDA, to get additional support to look at accessory dwellings and perhaps carry a zoning change through on that. I think the intent with the proposed action plan was to recognize that 2 or 3 things could be working through the pipeline at any given time. And that first item was written with an intentionally broad spectrum. During the community engagement process for this chapter, there was interest in duplexes, there was interest in quadplexes, there was interest in accessory dwellings. And so I think the expectation is that if accessory dwelling units are popular and they can get amended in the zoning ordinance, then I think the expectation would be to turn around and tackle another element. It could be that it's looking at lot sizes or lot coverage limits or the definition of family in the city zoning ordinance. That I think these are things that are going to be sensitive discussions, and tackling them one at a time can be an effective tool.
Thank you for that explanation. That's great.
Mr. Stevens.
A couple of comments also. First of all, thanks for adding that sentence about accessory dwelling units. I'm hoping that that will provide an opportunity to have some structured discussions in the community, because I think there's probably a need for some education. A lot of people come into this with one particular view as to what this could mean, and it generates a lot of kind of poor images, perhaps, as to what could happen. And I think the country now has enough experience with these that we could probably benefit from inviting a few folks in to kind of help lead some discussions on here's how it can happen in such a way that will lead to some good results you might not have thought about. So anyway, thanks for adding that. You may even want to consider adding a definition in the glossary, but I realize it's confusing with the way that the city has traditionally used ADU, same acronym. So, but anyway, I'll throw that out. I think as I look at the definition of cost burdened, I know it's kind of defined for us. We don't have a chance to kind of modify that, but it's rather rigid. And if you take into account the transportation opportunities that exist here that won't exist in further out suburbs, people can really save a lot on transportation here. And therefore, 30% may not mean the same here as it would further out. So it's just an issue. I'm not going to recommend that we make a change at this point, but I would hope in our ongoing discussions on housing in the city that we can take into account some attributes that we have given our location. One thing was kind of confusing to me. It's on page 16. It talks about one of the most needed home types is large rental apartments. And I guess the thought that came to mind there was that when you take a look at all of the mixed-use projects that the city has undertaken over the last decade or so, the first one was Pearson Square, and that had a lot of three-bedroom apartments. And whenever a discussion on a subsequent mixed-use development comes up, everyone typically says, we don't want it to be like Pearson Square with all of those three-bedroom apartments. So I was kind of puzzled to see that. I mean, I can certainly understand that it's a desired home type, but as to whether or not the city will actually proactively engage in seeking that, I couldn't quite reach that point. So I'll just make that observation, and perhaps there's a few ways to tweak that so that it doesn't get misinterpreted as that the city is proactively going out and working with developers to come up with projects that have a large number of three-bedroom units. And I think that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Do you have any comments about, especially the large rental? I mean, I know that Pearson's was a condo that got transferred into rentals, but this does strike me as somewhat inconsistent with what we've been saying.
So I think this was discussed, the kind of housing that's been approved and developed in the city over the last several years, that's been a point of discussion, that there was a hole in the city's demographic pie, that there were relatively few smaller households in the city prior to the construction of the apartments along the commercial corridors. So the projects that were approved were filling a hole in the city's demographics, which is a fair goal to have, housing a complete community, making sure housing types are available for all households. I think what's been seen in hindsight is that now with so many one-bedroom units in the city, are there rental options for families? And there aren't as many options now relatively for families as there are for smaller households. And so I think what this chapter is saying is that that discussion needs to be revisited. Is the city building apartments in the right mix of units? I think there was a term that was a good one that caught on with a few communities, the idea of planning for the triple bottom line. With each policy action that was being taken by the city, was it advancing the right balance of financial interests, societal interests, equity interests, as well as environmental interests? Because sometimes you may do something because it does great for your environment and it does okay for the other things. Or you might do something because it advances all three. Or you might do something simply because it's important to do. For example, the Miller House is not going to be a moneymaker, but it is important for the city to provide housing for people with disabilities. So there's always that balancing act in city policy, and I think this paragraph is opening up that conversation.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say that I think where this chapter is sort of a wonderful reflection of a lot of hard work and a lot of thought given to what we want to be as a community. We have talked about this. I always try to repeat on these kind of nights where we just are approving action, how much work has gone into it. I know you addressed some of that in terms of in the staff report and went through all how long this process has been going on. But this document has taken on, has been worked on by many, many, many stakeholders in a way that not all the other chapters have had, and a lot of cares to try to make this coincide with that vision statement that you read. I think that the people the community and the leaders who have helped shape this document, along with the Planning Commission, have really tried to hold up a really high ideal here. This is a housing crisis. We've heard that term throughout almost every work session. Anybody who's come to speak before us, anybody who shows us the financial figures and what's happening region-wide, and we as a city, while we don't have all the solutions, we are trying to, I think, through this document, do all we can to help do our part to try to solve this housing crisis. It does not have all the answers, and we don't have all the action items or the entire plan worked out, but I think it sets forward for the community what we hope to achieve, even though we are a small, piece of what is a larger regional problem. So I think this is a wonderful, wonderful document, and there's been a lot of work and revisions done actually in the last couple of months to take it from where it was, which was already good, to be more refined and more specific and more aspirational, actually. So I'm really proud of this document that the Planning Commission is putting forward, but really the work that the city has done and the leaders across the many, many groups that it shows that have provided input. With that said, I'm going to open up to the public to make sure we get all the input we can. You have a petition. Wonderful, thank you. Peter Davis, come on down. If you could state your name and your address for the record.
I am Peter Davis, 136 South Virginia Avenue, and I'm a member of the Housing Commission. I am here first to share, I have a message from the Housing Commission here representing them. Oh, hello, yes. I'm here first to share the Housing Commission's appreciation that the Commission's suggested additions to the comprehensive plan were included. We are very appreciative of that. Second, I want to share our continued urgent plea that in your work as you move forward toward finalizing and implementing the upcoming comprehensive plan, you keep housing affordability in the front of mind. As we wrote in our letter to the City Council this past month, housing affordability has reached a crisis level in Northern Virginia, a crisis that will only intensify with the anticipated job growth that is expected to further accelerate over the next several years. Since 2012, the stock of affordable housing units in the city has decreased drastically from 470 units to 287 units. That's a 40% drop in affordable units in less than a decade. As a result, Falls Church schools have the lowest percentage of students eligible for free and reduced lunch in all of Virginia, and Falls Church is listed as the richest jurisdiction in the state. These two indicators are not something to be proud of. They are indicators of a crisis for our city. This type of economic exclusion from our school district and community is a shameful reality for our city and is the result of an affordable housing policy failure. We are simply not ensuring enough affordable housing to include people of diverse socioeconomic backgrounds in our city. And this exclusion specifically affects our teachers, school administrators, first responders, local government employees, and service workers who wish to live in the city in which they so devotedly work. Diversifying our city through increasing affordable housing is a multifaceted project, but in our letter to the City Council last month, we included 3 ideas: allocate funds to an affordable housing trust fund, revise local zoning ordinances to allow for accessory dwelling units, and prioritize affordable dwelling units in negotiating concessions with multifamily market rate developers. Even a 6% set aside, which is not even mandatory, will not replace the lost housing stock. It needs to be more. These 3 reforms are just the start, and again, we are encouraged to see them in the chapter, but we'd like to reiterate again that in your finalization and implementation of the comprehensive plan, the Housing Commission urges both you and the City Council to act decisively and boldly before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that, just a sort of comment on that, I don't think that, my own view is that it's, we could always do more as a city, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do. But I think it's more complicated than just a bad affordable housing policy. I think that the market forces and the other ideals that we promote in the city has caused this, along with what's happening in the region in general. And as I said before you spoke, I think that a lot of what's in here is aspirational and trying to address those things. It is a really complicated issue that has tremendous market forces. People are not, while people want to be in the City of Falls Church, it's very difficult for the city to, without large efforts and money, to draw in the kind of development that we're talking about that would promote affordable housing. That is a real challenge. It's one that we should continue to pursue. But I do think it has a lot to do with market forces as opposed to a terrible affordable housing policy. The housing stock that we're losing now is very, very unfortunate, and I hope we do all we can and do act decisively. But in terms of the comprehensive plan and the guidance that we're providing, I think this is a good representation of where we're at as a city. So I appreciate your comments, and I think they're instructive to everybody, and hopefully we follow through as a city, not just as a plan, but as in terms of action. Any other public comments? All right, well then I'm going to close it to the public, and ready to entertain a motion.
It's either you or me.
You can't make Corey do all of it.
Mr. Chairman, I propose a resolution recommending approval of an amendment to the 2005 Comprehensive Plan to update and replace Chapter 10 Housing with Housing a Complete Community Housing Chapter of the city's Comprehensive Plan. Whereas the Virginia Code Section 15.2-2223 requires the city to have a comprehensive plan for the city that considers, among other things, the needs for the residents of the city, and consideration of those needs requires an understanding of the existing housing stock and future housing demand. And whereas the Virginia Code Section 15.2-2223 also requires that the city have a comprehensive plan that includes a designation of areas and implementation of measures for the construction, rehabilitation, and maintenance of affordable housing to meet the city's current and future needs of residents at all income levels. And whereas Chapter 10 of the city's comprehensive plan, Housing a Complete Community, will replace the existing chapter Housing and will replace the city and will provide the city council and city staff with updated, valuable information regarding the housing needs of the city on which to base planning decisions. And whereas Section 17.04 of the city charter makes the planning commission responsible for preparation of the city's comprehensive plan, and whereas 17.06 of the city charter enables the planning commission to prepare and adopt individual chapters of the comprehensive plan, and whereas Section 15.2-2228 of the state code also gives the city council the authority to grant final approval to the comprehensive plan changes previously approved by the planning commission, and whereas Housing a Complete Community was developed with substantial public engagement that included community meetings, a survey, a review by the city's advisory boards and commissions, and whereas Housing a Complete Community identifies a new chapter vision which supports and advances the city's Falls Church 2040 vision, and whereas Housing a Complete Community identifies strategies and actions to implement the Falls Church 2040 vision and the new chapter vision. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Planning Commission of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, that Chapter 10, Housing a Complete Community Housing Chapter for the city's comprehensive plan, which is attached hereto and hereby adopted by the Planning Commission as an updated and revised housing chapter of the city's comprehensive plan, replace the version that was adopted on October 24, 2005 as part of the 2005 comprehensive plan.
I second that.
Any discussion? All right. Can we take a roll call vote on this?
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Mr. Wadiska.
Yes. Terrific. Thank you, everybody who worked really hard on this. A lot of input from many, many stakeholders. Okay, let's move on to the George Mason High School plan.
Sure. If I could, just to the previous item, I do want to celebrate. This was a new way for city staff of building a comprehensive plan. This was done in partnership between two jurisdictions, sharing the authorship between Housing and Human Services as well as planning staff. We saw this as a way to speed up service delivery as well as a way to bring in subject matter expertise more closely with the plan authoring. Of course, we're following a similar model with the Natural Resources chapter, working in coordination with the Environmental Services coordinator, environmental programs coordinator, sorry. For the next item, I do want to turn this over to Mr. Fuller and Mr. Hollern, who have been working on this item.
How many more of these chapters we got?
Well, planning never stops.
Of course,
because
until we've,
city building is
until we've
never done.
updated the 2005 version is what I,
Off the top of my head, I would say 9,
9 more.
somewhere between 6 and 9.
Wow.
A lot of chapters. I think we go all the way up to 10.
Then we start
We
over.
must go to 11.
Then we start over again, right?
And
Then we start over again.
The land use chapter is still to come.
Correct.
Well, you guys are hitting your stride. They're pumping them out.
All right, for the next item then?
Yeah.
All right,
Mr. Fuller?
thank you. Next item is 6C, George Mason High School Site Plan, Phase 1B. This is a public hearing. It's also final action on the site plan. The applicants and the school team representatives are present here, and we've asked them to do a brief presentation, as this is our public hearing, as well as Jeff Hollern will provide a brief staff report. So I'm going to turn that over to Jeff now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Planning Commission members, tonight's public hearing on the George Mason High School site plan is a follow-up from the May 20th approval of Phase 1A and the July 15th Phase 1B work session. The site plan is in its final form and is overall in compliance with the standards set by zoning, planning, and public works requirements. The 6 listed waivers for consideration with approval are shown on line 14 of the staff report. 5 are related to parking and associated landscape buffer requirements, while 1 other has to do with the subdivision consolidated plat, which has already been approved by the Planning Commission at a prior public hearing. As I mentioned, this public hearing is a follow-up to the May 20th approval of Phase 1A, which allowed for pre-construction activities to take place at the site. This included construction fencing, site demolition, rough grading, excavation, foundation and footings, and utility work to serve at the existing concessions building. Tonight's action on Phase 1B is for all other construction building activities and would represent full approval of the overall site plan, which is a prerequisite for the applicant to pull building permits and begin construction. Phase 2 will be a forthcoming site plan amendment to address the trapezoid area that is part of a larger economic development project at the site of the existing high school. This phase is scheduled to come before the Planning Commission in late summer or fall of 2019, when the applicant is prepared to submit their amendment to this site plan. The second phase is expected to provide the remaining 193 parking spaces and associated site work needed to meet the site's overall parking requirements, which is 400 spaces. Since the last work session, the applicant submitted these final plans on July 17th, which were distributed to staff for final review ahead of tonight's meeting. Staff's comments were brief, citing one minor tweak to the plan set. DPW, zoning, and planning have otherwise completed the review of the stormwater requirements, and the site plan is in conformance. The schedule moving forward consists only of the expected Phase 2 submission as a site plan amendment later this year. Attachment 10 in your materials includes the project's construction phasing and parking management plan, which can shed light on the target timeline for construction from now until completion. I'll turn it over to the applicant if they wish to address the commission for tonight's action.
What was the one adjustment you'd said, other than the DWPs? You said there was a small tweak.
Yeah, you can see, let me see, I'll pull it up here on the. Where'd it go?
Yeah, just a label. I thought.
Yeah, I just didn't see it in the report when I read it, so I just want to make sure I've seen it. I'm sure it's in there, I just,
Yep, looking for you. It's on, the comment is line 422 of the staff report. Trying to pull it up on your screen.
no, I'm
It's not
trying to
working
get
for
on
me.
mine too.
Basically a labeling issue?
It's, I think that some of the information had fallen off the page, and that's something that DPW is commenting on.
But overwhelmingly, it is representative of what we saw at the work session a couple weeks ago. Okay. All
Yes.
right. Okay. For the
Great.
sake of the public, I think we have seen this. Please make your presentation.
We will. Thank you very much. We're very excited to be here. I'm joined by Jennifer Max, our builder, Daisy Brangman from the owner's rep. We have a really quick presentation, just really a quick overview of where we've been. So if you can just go ahead. We're excited to be here. Again, we've used this slide before, but it's important to note that, you know, we haven't done this by ourselves. We've done it with all of you all, and we're very fortunate to have gone through this project and to drive down Leesburg Pike and see all the activity going on. Next. So our site plan is largely what it was before. The tweaks that we have been doing the last few weeks have more been, you know, the kind of the engineering calculation, things like that you really don't see aesthetically. So aesthetically really hasn't changed. And just for reiteration, we've created a unified 612 campus, grades 6 through 12, by placing a building next to the middle school. Consolidated athletic fields all in the back of the site. Created a good neighbor zone, and I think because of the good neighbor zone and the flexibility that it offers, it allows the city and the school board to really do what they're doing right now, which is provide some flexibility with the economic development site. Maximize functionality of the site. We're utilizing 100% of the site. No square inch is not unused. Safety and security, obviously, consolidating everything, providing a perimeter is extremely important. Community access. This school and this campus is not just for the school board, but also for the community as well, both inside the building and also on the site. And stormwater management best practices, which we've talked about, of course. Next. Actually, go back. Yeah. So just to reiterate how the process has been in terms of the phases, as Jeff and Gary talked about. So phase 1A is what you see here, allowed for construction mobilization, preliminary site work, excavation, which you're seeing right now, and then ultimately building foundation to grade. So thank you very much for the collaboration for that to be able to allow us to get to work. Next. Oops. 1B. Fast. 1B, as Jeff said, is full construction activities for the area indicated. And then next. And then phase 2, the trapezoid, which is full construction activities for that area. So in addition to that, when we come back, and you go to one more, we'll provide a few things. We'll provide for the design of the trapezoid, which is what you've seen, at least in concept, which is a surface lot, providing the additional 193 or so spaces to meet our 400 total. But also, we've been in coordination with the economic development team in terms of alignment of Mustang Alley and what happens adjacent to our site. In addition to that, we've also modified the plaza in front of the school to accommodate some comments, not only from the commission, but also from the client itself. So you will be seeing those things as part of our amendment. So we are going through internal client review right now. So we're getting there. And then subject to that, we'll be coming to Gary and to the staff for a meet and greet to discuss where we are and to provide comments before we get too far down the line to make the process hopefully smooth and seamless. So we're coming to you guys pretty soon, perhaps in a week, no more than perhaps 2 weeks. Next. So quickly, in terms of the plans, the building is organized from the lowest level of the building, from the entrance on level 1 and down. It's just the public spaces, including up to level 2, which is where the library media center is. We have the gym at the lowest level, the auditorium at level 1. So in a nutshell, all the public spaces are within the first couple of levels of entrance, and then as you go up 3, 4, and 5 are all the academic buildings. So we were able to split the building up that way in terms of being able to offer almost half of the building for community use while being able to secure the rest of it. Next. Again, reiterating 3 renderings that we've shown to the public before, the outside of the building here. We've eliminated a few trees here that otherwise would have covered the beautiful facade, but otherwise, this is our building with a combination of different bricks, metal, and glass. Next. The view from the field, as you can see here. You can see some of the site design in terms of what we're calling the North Promenade in front of the gymnasium in the back here and its relationship towards the stadium. Next. View from Mustang Way. You see the softball field to the right there. We didn't include the fencing, but that's the view from the back. Next. And then, so Jennifer will talk about the construction phasing.
I think you've seen these quite a bit as well, but just for the record. So we're currently in the summer excavation phase, getting ready for the return of school. So it includes not only the work behind the construction fence, but also prepping areas outside the fence for the temporary parking that will be in place because of that which was displaced due to the new footprint of the building. If you click to the next is what the site will look like this fall. So most of our activities at that point are behind the fence. The blue line that you see is actually already started. That is the development team running their underground electrical duct bank. So that started on site a few weeks ago. This then takes you through this basically winter and spring of 2020. At that point, all the underground duct bank work is done. We will be looking at the extension of the sanitary sewer work. Will happen sometime during this time frame, which is not yet shown on this drawing. But again, all the work at this point is behind the fence line. And then those yellow exclamation points are just throughout this process when school is in session, we're maintaining safe egress out of Mary Ellen Henderson for students and staff. Next summer becomes a very busy activity for us on site. That's when we'll reconstruct all the parking lots that are located along Leesburg Pike. And we'll also still be working with inside the fence line. At this point, we're also creating the new loading dock for the new high school. It will be used for construction use until the high school opens, and the middle school won't flip to the new loading dock until after the summer of 2021. When school comes back in fall of 20, that new parking lot along Leesburg Pike has been completed. Again, just finishing touches with inside the fence line, getting ready for December 2020 for the school to move in and get ready for classes to start in January 21. And then January 21 is the next slide. So this has us, we still have some fence in place. We'll be finishing the fields behind the school. And at this point is when the economic development team has started the demolition of the existing high school, which is also a trigger for us. We have additional site work that needs to happen after the existing school has been removed. So then that final summer for us is from the school team is focused on doing that connection of the trapezoid, completing that parking lot, and completing the roadway along the front of both of the schools. And then we have a little bit of cleanup that'll happen. At this point, all the fields have been completed, getting ready for the late summer activation of summer sports, getting ready for the fall. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any comments for the applicant here?
Got one. It's relatively simple. For the surface parking lots that are in Phase 1B, is there any, are there any plans to at least put some conduit there for the positioning of future EV charge stations when the school can get funding for the actual stations themselves, at least to have the conduit there to be able to facilitate
We've had
it?
those conversations. We're hoping that the PPA development process will come along a little bit further. It's really, it's hard to guess what they might need. So the ideal situation would be that there would actually be a provider on board and they would provide what their needs requirements are so that we could coordinate that.
Yeah, I think the conduit would be relatively inexpensive, so it's just a matter of including it in the plans.
It's just where it goes to. We actually had a call about this in the last week, so knowing where they're actually planning on providing PV, where they're planning on putting EV stations, we need to understand where those are so that the conduit would be in the right place. But it would be easy for us to do while the excavation's open next summer.
Next summer. Okay, thanks.
Any other comments? All right. Well, I don't, just a real, just a general comment. This is, as far as the Planning Commission is concerned, a momentous day. This really represents more the site plan that we are used to approving versus the, Phase 1A. I'm, again, really proud of what all the people involved have done, including the team coming before us time after time after time to make sure we understood what was happening and listening to our input and making those changes. We talked extensively at the last work session about the parking, and while I think it's actually less than ideal, I'm not thrilled about how much parking is. It was very clear that should things change or should parking requirements be reduced, that we can add these islands back in at a later date, which is what I hope we ultimately do, maybe a decade from now or something like that, as I think transportation will be changing over that time. But overwhelmingly, it's a beautiful school. It's a good use of the site. It meets the needs and requirements of the city and has been really responsive to the input that we've received on the Planning Commission, and I think the community has provided as a whole. So it's a really exciting thing. The first phase and the first excitement was going to the groundbreaking a few months ago, and then as far as for planning commissioners, this is really our celebration here, even though it's somewhat muted and hidden in the middle of in August. But I'm really excited that we're getting this done. It sounds like things are going on schedule at this point, and that's really important as we have lots of pieces that are dependent on this and the timely completion of it. So really, thank you very much. It'll be with great pleasure that I support this. So thank you for all your efforts. Any other comments before we make a motion? Actually, this is a public hearing. I'm sorry. So any comment? Have we received any petitions for this item? All right. Well, let me open it to the public before we move on. Anybody have any comments? All right. Seeing none, I'm closing it to the public. And I am, once again, willing to entertain a motion. I think, Tim, you are up. Got a high bar here to clear. We've had.
Yeah, we got all of those items, too, the variances. Okay.
No one gets off easy in that.
Apparently not. Mr. Chair, I would like to make the following motion of site plan application number 2019-0013. Whereas the planned George Mason High School and related campus site improvements provide significant community benefits in providing for the construction of a new high school and adjacent land to provide for the West Falls Church Economic Development Project, a proposed vibrant mixed-use development, and whereas the planned George Mason High School project is generally consistent with zoning and the comprehensive plan, and whereas the site plan does not have all of the information required for full site plan approval, and whereas the Planning Commission finds approval of Phase 1B and related waivers will achieve the essential objectives of Division 7 site plans, Chapter 48-113, required information in the absence of the particular requirements, and whereas the requested waivers for Phase 1B of the site plan requirements would not be substantially detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the community, and whereas understanding the importance of the project to the community and the need to phase construction with the academic year, and whereas the Planning Commission recognizes that the site plan will be constructed in phases as provided for in Section 48-1139, phase development of the City Code, with the phases being as follows. Phase 1A is the site area as defined by the site plan, excluding Phase 2 area, but including only limited site development and pre-construction activities as follows: construction fencing, site demolition, rough grading, excavation, foundation and footings, and utility work to serve the existing concessions building. Phase 1B is the site area as defined by the site plan, excluding Phase 2 area, allowing any other construction building activities. Phase 2 includes all work on the Phase 2 area of the plans for the trapezoid area and future parking, stormwater, and other related site plan requirements. And whereas the Planning Commission finds that the following requirements of zoning ordinance section 48-1137 should be waived for Phase 1B only of the site plan as permitted by section 48-1138. 1, item number 5, subdivision plat when applicable. If a site plan covers more than one lot or parcel, a subdivision plat which binds the properties to the uses shown on the site plan shall be made part of the plan submittal. Approval and recordation of such plat shall be a condition of approval of the site plan. 2, item number 14, a schedule showing compliance with the off-street parking and loading requirements of Article 5, Division 2 of this chapter. 3, item number 15, the location and dimensions, vertical clearance, and the type of surfacing of off-street parking, loading, and standing spaces and aisles in accordance with Article 5 and Division 2 of this chapter. 4, item number 24, a separate landscape plan which satisfies the requirements of Section 44-109A and other applicable provisions of Chapter 44. 5, item number 26, disposition of stormwater drainage and detention systems indicating pipe sizes, types, and grades, including all calculations. 6, item number 27, existing and proposed sanitary sewage facilities indicating pipe size, types, and grades, and where connection is to be made to the city system, including all calculations. Now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission waives the requirements listed above for the submission of Phase 1B of Site Plan Application Number 2019-0013 and approves Phase 1B of that site plan for the planned George Mason High School. Furthermore, the Planning Commission acknowledges that at this time it is not approving Phase 2 and that the Planning Commission expects to review the full site plan requirements under Phase 2, including parking lot, at a date in the future.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Let not anybody say we aren't amazing at reading motions on this commission.
I have one other addition to that. So the waivers and modifications that are listed on lines 14 through 30, those will be included in your motion. I'm sorry they're not listed there.
Right.
And we referenced that in that long text. I mean, those
Yeah,
are the
you-
ones of course, we
You
knew
could
about
reference
those.
that by lines 14 through 30, the waivers and modification considerations as listed as a friendly amendment to the current motion.
Oh, it's not been referenced by one of these other items that was just read. That's what I was trying to make sure of. Okay. Tim, would you
Try to incorporate that.
consider making a friendly amendment to incorporate lines 14 through?
Mr. Chair, I would amend my motion by recommending that we reference lines 18 through 30 of the staff report to include the waivers listed in those lines in my motion.
Accepted.
He friendly accepted, in friendly way accepted that. Yeah, those deals with the parking waivers. And the final one is the landscaping. Okay, any other discussion before we take this vote? No? All right, let's have a roll call vote.
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
and Mr. Wadiska.
Yes. Congratulations. Yeah. Play the applause track. Yeah, thank you for all your hard work. Yes. Okay. Coming down from that excitement, let's move on to item 6D, the downtown park name.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, a tremendous project, the George Mason High School, to bring a new high school to the city. Of course, it's been added on to for the last 60 years since it was first built. And certainly a tour of the building shows that it's worth reinvestment. Next item on your agenda, as you requested, was a recommendation from the Planning Commission on a renaming of a city-owned park, the Downtown Park. This is a request to the commission, and planning staff does recommend a name of Mr. Brown's Park. This is, of course, the name that's been floated through the community and is, of course, well-deserving for a longtime member of the city and a contributor to the community. By way of background, the park is located in the 100 block of West Broad Street. The recent investment was through the Economic Development Authority, the EDA's efforts to breathe new life into the downtown by giving people an attractive place to sit and to recreate and to chance meet with one another. It's also a place where live music can be played. And of course, investment is still continuing, and it's already showing great promise. I think as people travel through the city, even in the evening hours, they're finding people enjoying the park. It's also convenient that it's summertime and it's next to an ice cream stand. That I think the saying goes that if you want to have a successful park, you need seating, you need sun, you need shade, and you need food. And all those things are available right there in 100 West Broad. By City Code, Section 2210, city-owned facilities can be named by resolution of City Council following recommendation, or they can seek recommendation on the naming from various groups, including the Planning Commission. That's why this item is before the City Council tonight. It is scheduled for action by Council at an upcoming meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any comments? Yes. Mrs. White?
Brown's Hardware holds a very special place in our heart, so I think it's terrific that this is being recommended. But I just wanted to ask if there are any parks in the city of Falls Church named after women?
Oh, interesting. They don't immediately spring to mind, but it's certainly a research question, and what can we do as a community to further that equality?
We have a library,
Middle school.
100% named after women.
All the libraries.
This is a discussion of parks.
Any other comments? I like the name. That's my full comment. I think it's a really apt name. As you said, Mr. Stoddard, in the report, I think named appropriately after somebody who has made a major contribution to our community over a long period of time. I think whoever proposed this one made a good choice, and I like the name Mr. Brown's Park. No more than that. So we have to, we are making a motion here as opposed to just a recommendation, or the motion is a recommendation? Okay.
Correct.
All right, well, who wants to take this long one?
I guess having benefited from 30 years of advice and counsel from Mr. Brown on things that I needed to improve my my house, it's with pleasure that I recommend that the Planning Commission recommend City Council adopt TR 19-27 to name the park Mr. Brown's Park.
Can I get a second?
It's not the same proposed motion, right?
That's what he read, isn't it? That's what I thought he read.
I added a bit about the 30 years.
I got that. Awesome.
All right, we have a second. Any public comment for this park name? Seeing none, closing it to the public. I probably should have done that first, but no one was really vocal on the other issues. So let's take a vote.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Mr. Wadiska.
Yes. All right. We are clicking through our agenda. Got them all done. We're only 3 minutes behind. Look how good you are at predicting.
Yeah.
Is that you, Jeff? No?
You give the clerk a good workspace,
Oh, okay.
and the meeting stays on schedule.
Well, we're killing it. Now let's move on to the Planning Commissioner's reports. Do we have any reports to report on?
I do have one. Mr. Rankin and myself attended the most recent EDC meeting, and a couple of things came out of that I thought worth sharing. One is there's a prediction at this point that the whole issue of scooters will be a prominent issue over the near term. As you know, we have in municipalities in Virginia are incented to adopt some type of a policy before the year end. Otherwise, state policy will kind of override their efforts. So this will likely mean something will come to the Planning Commission. I know we had a speaker a few weeks ago, so that was well timed, and I think it's likely we'll be asked to look at this again before the end of the year. The second item has to do with one of the restaurants in the city. Plaka Grill is moving to another location. Fortunately, it's within the city, but it has to do with problems of parking in that location. And it was recommended by Councilmember Hardy that the Planning Commission might want to take a look at the site plan that was approved at the time Plaka came into that site, to see if there's any possible changes that could be made to that any subsequent businesses that might want to take that site could perhaps avoid the same issues that were run into by Plaka Grill. So I would just simply throw that out as something that could be researched by staff to see if there is any, first of all, is it possible for the Planning Commission to review a site plan that's already been approved for modification, and if so, are there modifications that are relevant to the situation to reduce the parking problems that led to this action?
Well, I'll let staff answer some of your questions, and I am a little fuzzy on some of the details, but we have had presentations about the Byron before and their parking, and it had to do with, I may get some of this wrong, but there was some ability for the residents to reserve some of the spaces, and the way that had occurred was not consistent with what was originally planned. I just can't remember, but we have definitely
have priority for the good spaces. They're right there immediately behind. There is garage parking, but the signage is not particularly good.
And I can't remember where the patrons have to park. It's either on the top floor. It's a really bad parking lot situation. It's unclear. It's far away from the site. That was one of our earliest mixed development, not our earliest, I think the Broadway was, but there were some lessons learned on that Byron. It was definitely related to the parking. So I don't know what's in Cozy, I think, was first there, and then Plaka Grill took over, and I think each tenant has struggled with that parking issue. So sad to hear that it's continued. So I'll let you address some of the, is there something about the parking situation that the Planning Commission could revisit?
Sure, I'll take the topics in reverse order, start with the Byron, and then go back to scooters. So I did have a meeting earlier today with the landlord for the retail spaces at the Byron. He expressed to me what he sees as the situation in terms of trying to fill the spaces and trying to make sure that there's access to retail. That certainly auto parking is one aspect of how people get to spaces. It's not the only aspect of transportation, of course, bus, foot, scooter, bike. He did talk about the challenges that folks have of finding retail parking. The garage, there is, after you drive through the courtyard in the Byron, there are, I think, approximately 16 spaces available in the courtyard, and those are signed with a mix of parking for people with handicaps. There is parking that's either proposed or is signed for contractor vehicles. Then there's parking of various terms for different retail stays, and then there's the parking in the garage. The garage is 3 stories. There's no roof on the top floor, and there's no elevator on the garage. And so those are some challenges for folks who are familiar with the development across the street. The Spectrum does offer a retail elevator to get in and out of the garage more quickly. But I think in general, the idea behind parking strategies and parking management is that the folks who have shorter stays generally get the closer parking spaces. There's a rule of thumb that says the longer someone's willing to stay, the farther it is they're willing to travel from their parking space. So some of this just maybe revisiting what was in the development approvals. Is that being abided by the development? And of course, are all the parties within the property working together to find a good joint solution? So I think to your question, we're going to be looking at it at the staff level first to make sure that it's in compliance with the development approvals, and also to be having a conversation with the property owners, both representatives of the condo as well as of the retail spaces and the businesses that are in there, what can be done to make a better situation. The first topic that was raised was scooters. There is a tentative schedule to take some talking points to a council work session on September 3rd. There was talk about making that joint with the Planning Commission. This group has a busy agenda that night, and so I think that the tentative plan is to make that a joint work session with the CACT, Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation. Of course, the Planning Commission would be a key stakeholder in the deployment of scooters throughout the city.
We should talk about the agenda on the 3rd. I know that myself and other commissioners are interested in having some input. If there's other opportunities to have input prior to the end of the year, then perhaps we don't need to attend and can continue with that plan. But I know it's important to many of us.
Yeah, what's the, of course, the staff report is still in development. It's a month away from the meeting, but the state code that Commissioner Stevens referenced lays out various elements of a scooter policy that a municipality has to provide, so that work session on the 3rd is intended to introduce what are those elements that have to be defined, and then provide information about a best practices review, what are other communities doing. Of course, the Commission's actually ahead of the game with the Speaker Series event that was held just a few weeks ago. So some of this will be setting the table in terms of what needs to be acted on before the end of the calendar year, and some of this will be providing research about what are other communities doing, and then, of course, getting input from stakeholders, council, CACT, later Planning Commission, about how to make certain decisions. Where do the scooters go? Where can they be left? How many should there be? What age group is appropriately to be using these things? What other safety considerations have to go into effect?
Yeah, I think we heard the speaker series. We talked about it. I think it's a complicated issue. I recently got back from Paris, and it's completely unregulated there, or at least it appears to be, and it diminishes in some ways from what is an incredible, unbelievable city. Just scooters everywhere. They sort of overtaken, infested Paris, and while I don't think that'll happen here in Falls Church, it was just a sort of cautionary tale of when it looks completely unchecked, honestly. And then I took another trip over to London, and they're completely banned, and the feel the city had a much more traditional feel. It didn't feel overrun by this mode of transportation, which I actually support. It's just complicated how to regulate it. So, recent experience. Any other Planning Commission reports? Okay, well then let's move to the Director's report.
All right, thank you, Commissioners. Let's see. New Planning Commission Clerk, of course, Ms. Emily Bazemore, talked about
Once
that.
again, welcome.
Let's see, Planning Commission liaison assignments. So there has been a turnover in the Planning Commission. So for your information, the liaisons are included in Attachment 1. And these are the assignments, or at least staff's understanding of the reassignments following the discussion at the July 15th meeting. Of course, if we have any errors, we're happy to correct.
I think you have correctly captured it.
All right, I will pass that along to the folks who did the work. Let's see, upcoming public hearings and Planning Commission action items. This is a look ahead at the Planning Commission's agenda, and this is the September 3rd schedule that you referenced earlier. It's action on a couple of site plans, the Mary Riley Stiles Library, the Columbia Baptist Church expansion, recommendation to council on a zoning change. For reference here, the Tree Commission is looking to change their name to the Urban Forestry group, commission, council. Because their name is referenced in the zoning ordinance, all zoning changes come through the planning commission for recommendation. That's why the item is before you. And then I think the reason for the name change is that they're hoping to redefine that they're not just about trees, but about forestry. And of course, they're working in an urban setting. And then a work session on the update to the natural resources chapter of the comprehensive plan. Other items. I'm sorry?
Is that our next meeting? September?
Yes, I believe the direction was for the planning commission to take a recess on its August 19th meeting. The other item of note that's not referenced in the report is a scheduled groundbreaking for the West Falls Church multimodal transportation project. This is the $15.7 million grant from the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, which is going to connect and expand transportation facilities in and around the west end of the city. So this is money to provide better connections to the Metro, to I-66, to the WNOD, to Route 7, to Haycock Road, Shreve Road, redo intersection geometries, widen the sidewalks, install necessary stormwater retention that goes along with transportation. So it really is a tremendous benefit to have a partner like the NVTA in transportation funding. And of course, we want to celebrate their contributions to the city and the region's transportation network.
When is that groundbreaking?
That is August 26th at 10 a.m., and it'll be on-site.
Okay. With regards to the Columbia Baptist expansion site plan, is this when we are anticipated to make some sort of motion regarding the site plan? Because is that true?
That is correct. It is, as drafted up in the agenda, it is posed for action that night.
Because I feel like at the last work session, there were a lot of unanswered questions about the parking, and
We're going to revise their plans, too.
yeah, I thought it was a fairly substantial guidance that said, this plan doesn't work. This parking solution spread out all throughout the city and without commitments was not going to be acceptable. Is your understanding that the current plan, as proposed, has made a lot of those adjustments? If not, I would like to talk about it and maybe discuss this item on the agenda. Because I don't want to consider something that is simply a resubmission of what was at the work session.
Sure, if I understand, the direction is that the group is not looking for another work session, given the amount of change that was expected, that the group is looking for only a plan that's been revised and is ready for action.
No, quite the opposite.
Oh, you're looking for a work session prior to action?
Yeah, I am actually. The plan as proposed at the last work session required significant modification. And at this point, having not seen anything, I don't think it's ready for a vote.
I think we were also looking for a more pedestrian-friendly modification to the facade on North Washington Street versus the original plans.
Yeah, there was real guidance given on that work session. I recall the parking part, but there was also some facade, and they may want to have another work session if it's similar to what was discussed at the work session.
Sure, I can take that direction back to staff and confirm that, one, that the applicant has responded to the commission's direction, and that, two, it is ready for a new work session and a fresh look by the planning commission.
Okay.
Other items on the director's report? None. That is the close of the report.
I was like, we got more coming. Terrific. We didn't have any correspondence, right?
Correct.
Okay. Well, any other comments before we adjourn? This was a very productive meeting, moved incredibly quickly, 9 o'clock.
Welcome back, Mr. Stoddard.
Yeah, welcome
thank you.
back. That's true. All right. Seeing no other comments, we are adjourned.